So, what does 2 plus 2 equals, everybody? Does it equal 4? 5? I'm pretty sure it's 5, right? No, wait, wait, is it 4? Wait, 1, 2, let's see. Let's see, 1, okay, 1 plus 1, that's 2. Okay. 1 plus 1 equals 2, so that's two twos. So 2 plus 2. Wait, that's got to equal 5, right? Because 5 is, wait, wait. Wait, Dostoevsky. Dostoyevsky's saying it equals 5. So I got to be right, right? If Dostoevsky thinks it's 5, it's got to be 5. Okay, guys. Okay. All right. The truth is, 2 plus 2 does equal 4, at least according to our laws of mathematics and how we numerically count things. All right, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 1 2 times, we got 2. If we got 1 3 times, that's 3. If we got 1 4 times, it's 4. It's a tautology that 2 plus 2 equals 4 because it's built into our own logical systems of reasoning that 2 plus 2 equals 4. That is our own mathematical systems of reasoning. That's how we count things. That's why 2 plus 2 equals 4. So when Dostoevsky says that 2 plus 2 equals 5, that is a thought experiment. Or more so kind of a I guess it's a challenge statement. It's an act of rebellion. 2 plus 2 equals 5 is a statement that is clearly wrong. You know that it's wrong, but you're saying it with confidence because you want to prove that as a human being, you have free will and you can say whatever you want. You can believe whatever you want, even if it's wrong. If someone told you that you will die if you cross over that ocean, oh, Greg, you want to go cross the ocean and sail your boat over to the new world? Well, you're gonna die if you do that. Well, guess what? Out of spite, I would get on that boat and I would sail over to the new world, regardless of what they said, right? That is how Dostoevsky believed human beings operated. He believed that we were that our natural inhibition was to act out of spite, that we would act in defiance of rules and regulations and logical conclusions, that if we were told one thing, we would do the other. In a sense, this is kind of like cognitive dissonance. Smokers will smoke even though they know that it's bad for them, right? Well, whatever. One more cigarette won't kill me, right? Cognitive dissonance. Except this is different. This isn't from an addiction. This isn't whatever. This is out of spite. This is doing something in order to defy the people who said that you couldn't. And that's how Dostoevsky thinks of humanity. Now, this is from Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, where he writes that man often operates out of spite. He doesn't travel, build, or create to reach an endpoint or to become. He does it to prove wrong all the odds that go against him. He does it for the journey itself, the process of creation. As Nietzsche said, man is in a state of constant becoming. Or Camus, the struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. That is, the human animal does not strive to become nor to reach a goal. Sure, perhaps reaching a goal or an endpoint is precisely our main motivator. However, it is not what gives us meaning. Change and growth is what fulfills us in life. Indeed, the function of life is to grow and evolve. That's what life does. It grows, it evolves. That's what living is. Living is a constant state of dying. Our cells are constantly dying and regenerating new cells through their deaths. And through death, there is creation. And that's what we do, right? As our cells continuously die, we grow. Growth is death. We grow and we evolve, we change over time. As such, reaching a goal or endpoint is, in a sense, anti-life. This is precisely why we eventually feel empty after accomplishing something. And this is why Nietzsche said it was better to become, or it was better to stay in a state of becoming than to become, because to become is to be in a constant state, and a constant state is more or less it's death. It's the end of change. Now we get to the point where we have what we want when we accomplish something. Then whatever that thing is, it it loses its value, and we're then overcome with the desire for a new goal or a new accomplishment. Our boulder rolled down the hill as soon as we reached the top. Now we must push it back up, right? Like let's say you saved up for a few weeks or a few months and you went and you bought a PlayStation 5, $500. Awesome at first, but then you realize that, well, really you were fine without the PS5 before you got it. And now that you have it, it's like you barely even play it. I mean, I'm speaking from experience here, just so you guys know. All right. So, according to Dostoyevsky, even if we knew reaching our end goal was impossible, even if everything was calculated out, we would still embark upon our journey towards the heights. That is, if we knew all we did was ignorant and led to death, we would still do these things to defy the calculation. We would do it out of spite. It is thus that while the order and law of 2 plus 2 equals 4 is good, and we believe it to be good, 2 plus 2 equals 5 sounds just as beautiful purely out of spite. Purely because it is a rebellion against certainty, against the notion that this world can be calculated. After all, man loves to defy nature, doesn't he? To live in spite of it. Or at least the modern man. This too is a will. Now, I recently started listening to the Emerald podcast. And in the episode titled On Justice, the host points out that nature exists as the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner of this world, much like the Western God, right? Nature levels everything. And I mean, of course, in my opinion, God and nature are the same thing. They're indistinguishable from one another. Of course, nature is a part of God, whereas God is not nature. That's a topic for when we get into the Bhagavad Gita, everybody. All right. Nature will always wipe the slate clean. Now, and I mean, this is right. This is Noah's Ark. This is when God sends the floods. This is Sodom and Gomorrah when God blows up the two towns. This is the Bhagavad Gita. I am come as right. I am become time, destroyer of the world, right? Wipes the slate clean. Now, 2 plus 2 equals 5, an expression more commonly referenced from Orwell's 1984. The expression is, and in the intro song 2 plus 2 equals 5 by Radiohead, that's where they were inspired. That's where the name of the song comes from. It comes from 1984. The expression is used to show that a totalitarian Big Brother dystopia can bend the individual's mind to its will. So much so, in fact, that the protagonist, Winston, eventually believes that 2 plus 2 equals 5 is true. Now, this false mathematical expression is utilized in this book to show the protagonist that the state is so powerful that they can manipulate your very thoughts, the very way you see the world, your very understanding of mathematical truths and truisms. In Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, he wrote, quote, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way, end quote. However, in 1984, this is proven wrong. The mind can be stripped from a person. It can be manipulated and changed. In one passage, O'Brien, a high-ranking official of Big Brother, demonstrates the power of the state. Quote, O'Brien smiled slightly. You are a flaw in the pattern, Winston. You are a stain that must be wiped out. Did I not tell you just now that we are different from the persecutors of the past? We are not content with negative obedience, nor even with the most abject submission. When finally you surrender to us, it must be of your own free will. We do not destroy the heretic because he resists us. So long as he resists us, we never destroy him. We convert him. We capture his inner mind. We reshape him. We burn all evil and all illusion out of him. We bring him over to our side, not in appearance, but genuinely, heart and soul. We make him one of ourselves before we kill him. It is intolerable to us that an erroneous thought should exist anywhere in this world, however secret and powerless it may be. Even in the instant of death, we cannot permit any deviation. In the old days, the heretic walked to the stake still a heretic, proclaiming his heresy, exulting in it. Even the victim of the Russian purges could carry rebellion locked up in his skull as he walked down the passage, waiting for the bullet. But we make the brain perfect before we blow it out. The command of the old despotisms was, "Thou shalt not." The command of the totalitarians was, "Thou shalt." Our command is, "Thou art." No one whom we bring to this place ever stands out against us. Everyone is washed clean, end quote. Everyone is washed clean, right? Just like nature, just like how nature washes us clean. That is, in the old world, we were told what not to do. Then in the age of totalitarianism, we were told what to do. In the age of Big Brother, we are told what we are. So much so that we can be forced to believe in something that goes against all logic and reasoning. Everything we have been taught in the past and our very identity as a human being, this is more or less what a cult does. A cult controls every aspect of its followers, including their beliefs about reality. Under the hands of a cult, an individual's very perception of reality can be manipulated at will. This is seen today in various religions, political parties, and other tight-knit groups. One's perception of reality is sacrificed for obedience and belonging. We believe certain things oftentimes for the sake of believing, for the sake of fitting in. And we're seeing this a lot today with, I mean, our very news is propaganda. What we see on the news, it's all, I mean, I heard this thing on this podcast. They were saying how in other countries, they know that their news is propaganda. Like in China and Russia, they're well aware that the news is propaganda. But in the United States, we just think it's news. We think they're informing us of real events. When in reality, it's propaganda. These news organizations are owned by big corporations like BlackRock and Vanguard Group, right? Now, in many ways, I think 1984 is a symbolism for extremist forms of religion and cults, right? It is what happens when people interpret sacred texts such as the Bible or Bhagavad Gita or the Quran, any of these holy books, literally. In a literal interpretation, sin is not suffering, but rather an actual act of defiance against God. In that regard, humankind is condemned to be in defiance against God. As this God is all knowing, they constantly are monitored by him, even their thoughts, and with even our most private, intimate parts of ourselves being subject to the eyes of God, whom in a literal interpretation is more or less the totalitarian dictator of the universe, one must then change who they are in order to appease this dictator. This is more or less how any cult works, right? Its members' self-confidence is reduced to ashes, and they're told how flawed they are. It is only by following the leader of the cult that they can perfect themselves, that they too can see the kingdom of heaven, lest they will be cast into hell. And there's something that's going on with political parties today, where the political party is the God. It's this all-seeing eye. And if you're caught believing anything else contrary to the party line, you're ridiculed. You're ridiculed as a heretic, right? Um, is something very common. in today's day and age. And honestly, it's been something that's been common throughout history, right? I mean, right now, I think it's mainly the Democratic Party, but at one point it was the Catholic Church in the 1400s. At one point um it was the Roman Empire during the time of Jesus Christ. One point it was the Egyptians. There's always been a ruling ideology, and whenever there's something that rebels against that, it's cast away as um, they're cast away as heretics, right? Now, Dostoevsky takes an entirely different route of interpretation of 2 + 2 = 5. For him, 2 + 2 = 5 is a symbol of freedom, right? It's almost the complete opposite of the 2 + 2 = 5 from 1984. It's a rebellion against the norms and beliefs of society. 1984 and the cult says, I will make you believe. But Dostoevsky says, I can believe whatever I'd like, regardless of its truth. Freedom of thought, then, can be used to tyrannize just as much as rebel. Alas, remember that the abused becomes the abuser. So, can we really be free in a free society? I know that's an odd question. Now, in a society ruled by the ideal of freedom, we may have the freedom to believe, yet with so many people having that very same freedom to speak, with our thoughts being a product of what we listen to, read, and observe, do we really have the freedom of thought, right? Because corporations also have the freedom of speech, right? Big corporations with a lot of money also have the freedom of speech. Vanguard Group has the freedom of speech. BlackRock has the freedom of speech, right? And if they're kind of dominating our media, if they're dominating what we see in the world, then how can we, if we grow up hearing certain voices telling us certain things, how can we say we have freedom of thought if we will inevitably believe such things, right? Every child is indoctrinated into the beliefs of their parents, right? If you grow up in a Democrat household, you're going to become a Democrat, right? It's plain simple. Your parents are going to talk about it. That's what they believe. Those are their morals. If you grow up in an Islamic household, you're going to become a Muslim. If you grow up in a Christian household, you're going to become a Christian, most likely. I mean, sure, you might rebel against that. A lot of people do rebel against what their parents taught them growing up. Um, but more or less, you're going to more likely than not believe what your parents believe about the world. Okay. So, quote, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are the three main virtues of the United States of America. Now, analyzing these virtues more closely, we can see the underpinnings of 18th century existentialism. The pursuit of happiness is echoed in Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus with the struggle itself, right? Happiness and meaning are similes here. While we may find meaning in our struggles towards happiness, that does not mean we are not still enslaved by the gods and burdened with the task of endlessly moving a boulder up a hill. Our quote free society is more or less an illusion. It is a 2 + 2 = 5 situation where we're taught to believe something that is inherently false. Right? Sure. Do we have a democracy or do we really live in an oligarchy? A society ruled by basically money, by finances, by the rich, by the powerful, by large corporations and entities. In Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, he highlights how our free economy creates an endless series of checks and balances for the everyday normal person while rewarding those at the top. That is, modern day capitalism is flooded with more bureaucracy and paperwork than we ever thought was possible. For instance, how many times have you filled out a self-review in your lifetime? How many times have you been asked to rate something, such as an interaction with a salesman or checking out at a restaurant or buying a product on Amazon? There are ratings and regulations as far as the eye can see. Fisher calls this the melting of everything into PR. Everything becomes something to show. To David Foster Wallace, this would be a spectacle. Everything in the world becomes something to watch, and all that is watched is subject to either being booed or cheered upon, right? 2 + 2 = whatever you want it to equal in our society. And if 2 + 2 = whatever you want, And how are we to find those who still say it equals 4? In a world flooded with information, where can we find the correct information? This is something brought up in Brave New World. I saw this comparison between 1984 and Brave New World. And in 1984, there's basically, you're not allowed to read any books. No books are available. I think there's like 3 books available to you. And then Brave New World, you have an unlimited amount of information. In 1984, you don't have any given to you, so you can't read anything. But in Brave New World, since there's an unlimited amount of information, but you also have an unlimited amount of pleasure, you're just not interested in reading. You're not interested in learning anything. They sedate you with pleasure. Now, returning to Dostoyevsky, 2 plus 2 equals 5 is something not to be believed in, but rather a thought experiment of defiance towards certainty. Quote, perhaps the only goal on earth to which mankind is striving lies in this incessant process of attaining. In other words, in life itself and not in the thing to be attained, which must always be expressed as a formula, as positive as twice 2 makes 4, and such positiveness is not life, gentlemen, but is the beginning of life, but it is the beginning of death. He loves the process of attaining, but not quite like to have attained, end quote. Indeed, remember, the struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. If we were to attain all that we wanted out of the world, and if we pushed our boulder to the top of our hill, what would be left to fill our hearts? Now, it is often said that certainty is a man's worst trait. For in certainty there is stagnation, and in stagnation there is disease and death. But humankind strives to live. If we were to strive to an end goal, then we would inevitably strive towards death, for that is our only possible ending. It is such that a striving to be at one's goal is the beginning of death. This is Nietzsche's becoming. To become is the beginning of death. For what is death but the end of change, the final change, the change that brings one into the only state that does not change, that is, nothingness. The certainty of the world being nothing but equations and variables is a certainty that would make any human being sick inside. Here, we have to question the idea of the enlightened being. What is the enlightened one to do once they have lost all their suffering, once they have attained their goal and finally becoming at peace with the world? Over and over again, Dostoyevsky mentions that man loves suffering. After all, why else would the Buddhist doctrines say that life is suffering rather than life is joy? Why would Christianity claim that life is sin rather than life is God? Humankind has an obsession with struggling, an obsession with improvement and in becoming. For without the inclination to get better, without the striving towards the heights, what else would we have left to do on this earth? Why? Quote, why? Suffering is the whole origin of consciousness. It is the greatest misfortune for man, yet he prizes it and would not give it up for any satisfaction. Consciousness, for instance, is infinitely superior to twice 2 makes 4. Once you have mathematical certainty, there is nothing left to do or to understand, end quote. This reminds me again, and I know I've mentioned this on the podcast almost like, in every episode. This reminds me of Mainlander. At the moment of godhood, God would kill himself, for there would be nothing left for him to know. The mathematical certainty of all events and the knowledge of all the world's suffering would unfold before him, creating an entire universe from his heat death. I'm likewise reminded of Peter Zapp's The Last Messiah, in that the conception of consciousness led the first man to kill himself. The knowledge that all our actions cause suffering to others is debilitating. In the creation of a universe, God would know all the suffering he would consequently create. The anti-natalist would argue that such suffering makes life simply not worth it. As such, the enlightened being at the moment of enlightenment would have nowhere left to go but down. Enlightenment is, after all, it's only a moment, right? It's when the light bulb goes off and you see the world for what it really is. You see truth in your eyes. That's what you believe to be is the truth, what you're seeing of this reality right now. You get this moment of pure clarity, about the world. And at the moment of this enlightenment, and again, it's only a moment. Once this ideal is reached, it immediately becomes retroactive. Hence, the boulder rolls back down the mountain. Now, Dostoyevsky is aware that in his critique of certainty, he may seem as if he himself is certain of these concepts, right? He's almost like it's like the example of the agnostic, right? The agnostic is certain of their uncertainty. And I also read this book it's called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. It's kind of this book about these four archetypes, saying that, and one of the things in there is that the lover is, it's very interesting. If you read this book and also read The Myth of Sisyphus, you can find lots of links to Don Juan and Don Juanism, that chapter, and the lover archetype, and almost Camus himself, the artist, the philosopher, the person who wants to see beauty in everything. They love their food, they love being romantic, they love women, and they love feeling pleasure. And the lover is this thing that doesn't like certainty. Dostoevsky is also a philosopher, right? Does not like certainty. Okay. Now, he counters this critique of his own certainty of uncertainty. He counters it with, quote, I will tell you another thing that would be better, and that is, if I myself believed in anything of what I have just written, I swear to you, gentlemen, there is not one thing, not one word of what I have written that I really believe. That is, I believe it, perhaps, but at the same time, I feel and suspect that I am lying like a cobbler, end quote. So this is something that a lot of philosophers do, right? They, they'll write all these ideas, but a lot of times they're just writing what comes off their head. They're not really even sure if they believe what they're saying. I mean, I do the same thing. I'll write things down, all these philosophies, all this crazy stuff. I'll go back and read it and be like, really, I said that? Like, that's crazy. I'm not even sure if I believe that, right? It's something that a lot of um, philosophical thinking people do, right? Now, this returns us to the concept of certainty. The reality is that all our philosophers' thoughts and ideals are more or less made up. They come to our minds, and our minds expand upon them like a man traveling through a labyrinth. We could have just as easily taken one turn over another and ended up with a totally different set of beliefs. A Palestinian could easily have been born in Israel, just as an Israelite could have easily been born in Palestine, right? I could have ended up being an engineer instead of a data analyst. You could have just as easily ended up believing one thing over another. Yet that's not the important part here. The important part here is that the narrator is aware that he could have believed in a different set of philosophies. He's likewise aware that such philosophies are made up, that he doesn't truly believe in their validity. Or not that he doesn't believe in their validity, he doesn't take them to heart personally, right? He knows for certain that he knows nothing at all. So why write of them? Why write about philosophies he doesn't truly believe? Part of this, I think, is out of spite. He disagrees simply for the act of disagreeing. This is something I do quite often. Whenever someone tells me something they are certain of, I feel obligated, out of some sense of spite, to argue with them. Their certainty feels like a needle to my spine, is a cracking of glass that is freedom. Not only that, but who are they to think that they know the answers, right? They're not God. Who are they to declare that their certainty is as certain as 2 plus 2 equals 4? That it is so incredibly correct that it is comparable to a mathematical mythology, right? So, in a sense, this is his disclaimer. This is his way of telling us that he is not even certain of his philosophy regarding certainty and free will. This philosophy is as good as snake oil. Yet, sometimes we do hit a certainty, right? But it is a certainty that nothing is certain. There's a limit to our reasoning, a certain level of undeniable certainty that we cannot escape. When we are looking for answers, we often hit a wall, and that wall is what we call the impossible or the unknown. To Camus, this is what he referred to as the absurd wall from the myth of Sisyphus. Dostoyevsky writes, "The impossible means the stone wall. What stone wall? Why, of course, the laws of nature, the deductions of natural science, mathematics. For twice 2 = 4 is a law of mathematics. Just try refuting it. A wall is a wall. I cannot break through a wall by battering my head against it if I really have no strength to knock it down. But I'm not going to be reconciled to it simply because it is a stone wall and I have not the strength." End quote. He is mentioning one of humankind's greatest predicaments here. We cannot know everything. Not only that, but we are aware of the fact that we cannot know everything. We know that there is an end to our knowledge, an end to our reasoning. We cannot go any further. We know this is a fact. Yet we are nonetheless still not okay with it. As such, the wall feels like a prison. This is what Camus is talking about when he speaks of the absurd. The absurd is what happens when we mix our longing for meaning and understanding of the world with our knowledge that such has its limits. And those limits are reached very quickly. Even with the impossibility of absolute knowledge, we cannot be reconciled to this possibility. Now, Dostoevsky, like Camus, believes that as we discover more things we cannot know, the worse this pain of the absurd becomes. As a teenager, one of the first things that strike us is, or as unknown, is what will happen after death. Now, right, I mean, like, how many times have you, like, when you're a teenager, how many times were you just like laying in bed thinking about death? Just like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe like, when consciousness ends, like, what happens? Like, can it, like, if when I fall asleep and I'm totally unconscious for most of it, except like a few dreams, and then when I die, is there just like nothing? And that idea can just like eat you alive when you're a teenager. He's like laying in bed, about to go to sleep, right? Now, the thing about the absurd is that it is usually used to show the contrast between the lack of meaning and our desire to find it. As an analogy, I often wish that I won't have to sleep anymore. Yet I am fully aware that this is impossible. The idea of wanting something impossible is, of course, absurd, right? The more impossible things we want, the worse our despair becomes. We cannot have what we want, and we are aware that we cannot have it, right? Yet we want it nonetheless. Living forever is one of these things. We want to live forever regardless of that being impossible. Meaning is likewise something we want. We want to make sense out of the world, but there comes a point when we realize that we cannot make sense out of infinity. Yet we attempt to do so anyways. That is, even if it is known that what we desire is impossible to obtain, we will seek it nonetheless, right? Again, you can't count to infinity. Sure, you can know all the laws of mathematics all you want. You can know that 2 + 2 = 4, etc., but you cannot count to infinity. Even if you tried. Even a computer can't count to infinity. Nothing can count to infinity. It's impossible because guess what? It would take you an infinitely long amount of time. You'll never reach the end. Now, even if it is known that what we desire is impossible to obtain, we will seek it nonetheless, right? We act despite logic and reasoning. Dostoevsky writes, quote, twice 2 = 4 without my will, as if free will meant that, end quote. That is, free will has nothing to do with logic and reasoning. Logic and reasoning is only part of what makes up a human being's motives. Again, if everything was calculated out, people would act against such calculations purely out of spite. Without choice, life is dull. It feels boring. There is nothing to strive towards and nothing to gain. It all becomes one long, blank line. It is scheduled and known. Humanity does not desire the known path. They want the unknown. For it is the very definition of curiosity that one seeks that which they have yet to discover. If the world ahead feels known, then we will want to create chaos to make it unknown. If 2 + 2 = 4 feels dull, place the 4 with the 5 and everything changes. I will leave you with this. Quote, I admit that twice 2 = 4 is an excellent thing. But if we are to give everything its due, twice two makes five, is sometimes a very charming thing too. Thank you for listening.